Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 19th edition of Stay at Home, a video education project from Jacobin magazine. My name is Bhaskar Sankara, and I'm the editor and publisher of Jacobin. And almost every day at 6 p.m. Eastern, I've been being joined by a left-wing thinker who's been presenting an argument for around a half hour. I've been answering some questions about a particular topic. So if you want to participate in that discussion, all you have to do is add your questions through the YouTube chat box. And while people are still filing in, just a note, we have a really good lineup for this week. We have tomorrow, Chris Maisano on the Marxism of Antonio Gramsci, what all these concepts like hegemony, like war of position, what these concepts actually mean. And how they've been really radically taken out of context to the point that even figures from the right-wing evangelical right, like Jerry Falwell's of the world, to Steve Bannon, quote Antonio Gramsci, not to mention the misquotations of him on the left. So who was the real Antonio Gramsci? What did he believe in? What did he advocate? And what do his theoretical insights offer us today in the quest to make a fighting, active left? Then on Friday, we're going to be joined by David Kalnitsky, who'll be presenting the economics of a feasible socialism. So, will we need markets? What do we think about planning? Why did the Soviet Union face economic stagnation before its collapse? All these questions he's going to try to squeeze into a 25, 30-minute lecture. So I don't envy him for the task, but I'm really looking forward to that one. Then on Saturday, we have two different broadcasts. We have the second episode of Weekends with Anna Kasparian and Michael Brooks at 1 p.m. Eastern. Then at 6 p.m., we have Jacobin staff writer Megan Day on why every socialist should be a member of an organization. If you're in the United States, you should join DSA, what these organizations do, and why an unorganized socialist is a contradiction in terms. So our guest tonight is someone who knows that very, very well because she's been an activist and an organizer, and not just a writer of very, very incisive left-wing, propaganda and analysis. And that's Jenny Brown. Jenny is a women's liberation organizer and the former editor of Labor Notes magazine. She was a leader in the grassroots campaign to make the morning after pill contraceptive available over the counter in the United States, and was a plaintiff in the winning lawsuit, one of the really important victories for people in the United States in recent decades, and something that, of course, thanks to the work of Jenny and others like her, we really owe a debt to the political left for. For around a decade, she co-chaired a Labor Party chapter in Gainesville, Florida. That was, of course, a working class political party organized under the slogans, "The corporations have two parties, we need one of ours." And by the way, if you're interested in the trajectory of the Labor Party and what happened to it, there's some really excellent material on the Jacobin site that you should check out. So most recently, Jenny, in addition to her contributions for Jacobin over the years, is the author of Birth Strike, The Hidden Fight Over Women's Work, which I believe PM Press put out last year. And also later in the year, she had a book in the Jacobin Verso series, Without Apology, The Abortion Struggle Now. And she right now organizes also with the group National Women's Liberation. So before I pass it off to Jenny, though, just a reminder, because I forgot to mention at the top, press like on the video and please press subscribe. We generate our audience for these videos largely through the YouTube algorithm. It's how we're not just reaching the same existing Jacobin audience. It's one reason why we've been putting so much effort into this. YouTube is kind of sometimes considered a den of reaction. den of the right. We're trying to build up a left-wing socialist presence on it. So our ask for you, the viewer, is purely non-monetary. We're just asking you to press like on the video and subscribe. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Jenny now. Just as a reminder to everyone else, if you want to participate in the discussion with Jenny, please drop questions in the YouTube chat, because after she's done talking in around 25, 30 minutes, we're going to have a brief Q&A afterwards. But thank you for being with us, Jenny, and agreeing to do this. And go ahead and take it from here.
Thanks, Bhaskar. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to that Megan Day presentation. So we're in a position right now with abortion where governors are taking advantage of the pandemic to really try to slash abortion rights. But I'm gonna talk about that some, but I'm gonna go back to where we stood when the pandemic started, and what the politics and situation was then, and how we got to this place. So 30% of US women are going to have an abortion, and millions more rely on it as a backup to contraception. So you would think that that would be an enormous power block that, if it were unified, could outrun any opposition in the United States to abortion. But our defenders of abortion, with a few exceptions, have been kind of in an appeasement mode. NARAL Pro-Choice America, which follows the Supreme Court's reasoning in Roe versus Wade, sort of emphasizes privacy. We shouldn't, a quote from them, we should be able to make personal decisions without intrusion from politicians. And Planned Parenthood, which has been a target for a lot of attacks, including attacks with guns, has defended itself by emphasizing its role in cancer screening and well woman care. And one of the go-to slogans has become "abortion is healthcare." And while it should be seen just as healthcare, we need to be clear that the reason it's under attack is not because it's healthcare, but because it gives women and anybody who needs an abortion the power to control their reproduction. And in fact, you could say that abortion is our right to strike against the unfair working conditions that we face in the US right now, bearing and raising children. And if the current record low birth rate is any indication, US women are on an informal birth strike right now, which might indicate why the establishment is moving to further restrict abortion and contraception at this point in our history. I'll say more about this later, but I first want to take you through a brief history of how we won the rights that we do have, and what the strategy of the current mainstream abortion groups is, and why I think it's not working. The history of legalization of abortion in the US is often told as, the Supreme Court legalized it in 1973 with Roe versus Wade. And often it's a discussion of how we can use that legal framework to preserve. But the focus on the court has tended to cause us to overvalue litigation and lobbying, and undervalue the feminist organizing that actually got us to the point of having legal abortion. So in the post-war period, starting in the 1950s, the abortion reform movement was bumping along, trying to encourage public discussion of abortion. And it wasn't feminist. It mostly composed of doctors, lawyers, social workers, clergymen, all men, professors, and a few just plain women who weren't particularly feminists. Abortion strategist Lucinda Sisler says that these folks, quote, spent a lot of time debating with priests about when life begins and which abortions are justified. And these groups drafted model reform laws which would create narrow exceptions to the criminal codes that banned all abortions. And they had won such reforms in 10 states by 1970. But the reforms were cases like rape or incest or life or health of the mother. They even bandied about, well, if you'd already had 4 kids, could you get an abortion? That kind of thing. Sisler writes in 1970, she says, quote, part of the reason the reform movement was very small was that it appealed mostly to altruism and very little to people's self-interest. The circumstances covered by reform are tragic, but they affect very few women's lives, whereas repeal is compelling, repeal of all abortion laws, is compelling because most women know the fear of an unwanted pregnancy and in fact get abortions for that reason. It is the women's movement whose demand for repeal rather than reform of abortion laws has spurred the general acceleration in the abortion movement and its influence. And Sisler's group, New Yorkers for Abortion Law Repeal, put out its own model law, which is basically a blank page, to illustrate that you need an eraser to get repeal of a law. You don't need a pen. And their position was that abortion should be treated like any other medical procedure. It should fall under no special law restricting when, where, how, why, or by whom it's performed. And all of these things are regulated under our system. The idea is it should be completely removed from the criminal code. But the reform proposals that were happening didn't help a lot of people, and there was no mass movement to push for them. And even when you won them, you hadn't won very much. It was the women's liberation movement that was the mass movement that was needed for a breakthrough. And after it arose with demands for repeal of all abortion laws, the victories came in quick succession, starting in New York State in 1970, and then nationally with the Roe decision in 1973, which legalized most abortions around the country. It wasn't what the movement had wanted, but it was pretty good. Now, it was radicals in the women's liberation movement that led this fight. Groups like Red Stockings, which broke up a New York State reform hearing demanding repeal. So the good guys, supposedly the reformers, they actually went up against them and demanded repeal. They held their own hearing where women testified about their own abortions, which had been illegal at the time, and they could have been arrested for even saying that these things had happened. By 1970, every college campus had a feminist group referring people for illegal abortions or possibly legal ones in New York at that point. In Chicago, the Jane Abortion Service did 11,000 safe but illegal abortions, underground abortions. And they continued even after several of them were arrested. The women's strike in 1970 took over Fifth Avenue, and they had three demands, and one of them was free abortion on demand and no forced sterilization, because we know forced sterilization was also an issue, especially for poor women and women of color. So this was the size of the movement. You had clergy breaking the law and getting arrested for referrals. You had, in every state, there were marches and speakouts and rallies trying to get abortion completely taken out of the law. So when the court comes down with the Roe versus Wade decision, they are basically triangulating between the demands of the movement and the original laws, which in most states said you couldn't have an abortion unless you were about to die. So that's why we got Roe. It was the movement, not that we had a special legal strategy around privacy. So I recall the history because we're told that we needed, a professional approach in the abortion fight, a clever legal strategy. We need to do a lot of polling research. We need a polished public relations campaign, and we need plenty of donations to the groups that are doing these things. But these recommendations are leading us back to the reform movement, emphasizing the worst case scenarios, rape, health crises, privacy, which was something that the Supreme Court came up with. Privacy was, in fact, something that the women's liberation movement had to break through to publicly talk about their abortions to change the law. So that wasn't a strategy for the women's liberation movement. That was a legal strategy that the court came up with. The relationship between the patient and the doctor, which anybody who lived through that period in the 60s can tell you that doctors were not respectful of women's choices and desire to control their body. So that was also not a women's liberation demand. But these are the kind of things that are now being emphasized as we try to defend what we have left of abortion rights. And not surprisingly, they've produced similarly meager results. It was the women's liberation movement strategy that won us these rights. And when it was abandoned, we started to go backward. And I probably don't have to tell this audience that we now face extraordinary obstacles. The rate of unintended births in the United States is twice that of countries where we have good access to abortion and birth control. And the biggest problem is price. Medicaid won't cover abortion in most states. That hits low-wage workers and the unemployed the hardest. There's a long list of state restrictions, which all drive up the price, including waiting periods and ultrasounds. Clinics are closed by overregulation. 6 states only have 1 abortion clinic. Most states have parental consent or notification laws. In some states, doctors are forced to read anti-abortion scripts, lying to their patients, saying that abortion increases their risk of cancer, which is a lie, increases their risk of suicide, that's also a lie, or infertility, which is also a lie. And then there are fake clinics run by anti-abortion zealots, which are designed to look like medical facilities to confuse people. And they now receive public funds in 14 states, and now federally they're getting money. Meanwhile, pill abortions, which would be very useful during a pandemic, right, are walled up behind FDA restrictions, which make them just as expensive and inconvenient as getting a surgical abortion. Contrast this to Canada, where abortion is free at any stage of pregnancy through the country's national health system. So as this thicket of restrictions has put reproductive rights further out of reach, the mainstream discussion of abortion has again focused on that other woman, the one with cancer, the one who was raped, and professional experts are devising the strategy to preserve what little we have of abortion rights. And their arguments are apologetic, and they downplay the central role of abortion and birth control in women's freedom, which was the biggest selling point we had, right? And there really isn't a need to be this defensive. When abortion is put on the ballot in the states, it usually wins, even in the South, although voters have been willing to approve parental consent laws. So even when polls show that restrictions will win, they have been narrowly defeated. And Katha Pollitt suggests that this is because in polls, people want to express their disapproval of abortion, but they're not really ready to bring down the law on somebody who gets one. So as an example of this defensiveness and how it plays out, I think it's worth looking at the 2014 anti-abortion referendum campaign in Tennessee. The Tennessee legislature had tried to put through a bunch of restrictions on abortion, and they were blocked by the Tennessee Supreme Court, which has a privacy clause, and they appealed to that privacy clause. So the legislature put up a ballot measure to say that nothing in the Tennessee Constitution protects abortion, even in the case of somebody's going to die if they don't get an abortion. So now this referendum, if it had passed, it wouldn't mean that abortion would be illegal, but it might mean that they could put in more restrictions. Roe still stands, and you can't make a law that makes it more restrictive than the Supreme Court has said. So the abortion side raised $4 million, which was twice what the anti-abortion side raised. But their strategy was to focus on the no exceptions part. They thought that polling indicated that this strategy would succeed. So I'm going to show a couple of ads that they ran to try to sway voters.
The Tennessee Constitution is special. We have some of the strongest privacy protections in the country. Privacy is something we take very seriously. But Amendment 1 would strip away some basic privacy rights and force governmental interference into private medical decisions. And 1 opens the door for the legislature to take away additional rights, including marriage and child-rearing rights. Amendment 1 is government interference with far-reaching consequences on thousands of laws. It is deeply flawed. We should all vote no.
On Amendment 1, newspapers across Tennessee say vote no. The Tennessean says voters should be appalled at the deception and vote no. Even if you're pro-life, vote no because Amendment 1 violates privacy and makes no exceptions for rape or tragic things that can happen during pregnancy, like cancer. These difficult decisions are best left to a woman, her family, and her own faith, and it's not for the rest of us to judge. That's why doctors, religious leaders, and legal experts say vote no.
So you can kind of see the problem with the first one is that people won't know that the ad is about abortion. It doesn't even mention the word. It just talks about how special the Tennessee Constitution is. And you really can't defend abortion if you can't say the word abortion, if you're so defensive that you can't even say the word. And then there are these appeals to the extreme cases that don't mention the main reason that people are going to go out and vote for abortion rights, which is wanting to control our bodies in the course of our lives. Well, despite being outspent by the abortion rights side, that referendum won in Tennessee. So clearly this strategy was not actually a winning strategy. Going towards the center and even trying to encourage anti-abortion people to vote for to vote against your referendum was a failed strategy. Planned Parenthood nationally is also on the defensive. They have been attacked with fraudulent videos purporting to show them selling fetal tissue and all kinds of other lies about Planned Parenthood. So they're, they really have been attacked. But the result has been a series of ads about the non-abortion care that Planned Parenthood provides for cancer, endometriosis, breast cancer, HIV, screening. So here's an ad from 2016, which kind of shows how defensive things have gotten.
I found out I was pregnant, and it was not planned. My boyfriend and I were in a very new relationship. The most pragmatic option was to get an abortion. And I honestly was very conflicted. And I remember going in and I was still very torn about it. And when I went in to see the actual physician, I was still a wreck. She took a look at me and said, "Something tells me that today is not the day. Go home, take a night's sleep on it, and then reschedule." I'm so glad that I went to Planned Parenthood that day. I wish I knew her name so that I could thank her, not just for the role that she played in making me a mother, but for doing what she does, and women like her, just so that I can have a choice. If I had gone through some underground network to get some back alley abortion, not only would my son not be here, but I might not either. Words really can't express the amount of gratitude I have towards this woman.
So who is the audience for this ad? I mean, people who think Planned Parenthood is this terrible abortion mill, but sometimes they don't do abortions, so that's good. It wouldn't be out of place in a campaign for a 24-hour waiting period. See, women don't really know what they want. They should be forced to wait. Maybe they really do want to have a kid right now. So I think the successful referendum victory in Ireland, where they got rid of their abortion ban out of their constitution in 2018, I think that's a really good counterpoint. What they did in Ireland was, first of all, they had an abortion campaign, but it wasn't calling itself that. It was designed to deal with these terrible cases that the abortion system in Ireland regularly threw up, which was, a 14-year-old rape victim couldn't find two psychiatrists to say that she was suicidal, therefore she couldn't get an abortion, that kind of thing. So there were a lot of campaigns around particular cases, but there was no campaign demanding free, safe, legal abortion in Ireland. And some anarchist feminists in Dublin started to get tired of this, and so they started a group, and it really united a bunch of feminists around it. And they named it the Abortion Rights Campaign. And people said, "Oh, you can't call it abortion. It's going to turn people off." Well, it did exactly the opposite. The other strategy they did is they spoke out about the abortions that they'd had, many of which were illegal, because in Ireland all abortions were illegal. At some point they made it legal to go to some other country to get them, but essentially any abortion in Ireland is illegal and was illegal at that time. So people were speaking out about something that they had done where they had broken the law. And something that they thought a lot of people probably would disapprove of. And they did not just testify about the good girl abortions, which were for health reasons, or your fetus is going to die anyway. They talked about the bad girl abortions, which were basically, I don't want to have a kid right now. And then the other thing that they did is they relied on door-to-door canvassing, which is more common in Ireland than it is here, but still, they did a lot of door-to-door canvassing, and they talked to people many times, going back to doors again and again and talking to people very deeply about the issue. And that was their main organizing strategy. And they were, despite having the church against them and giant amounts of money poured in by the US anti-abortion movement, they were able to win that referendum handily. And they did it by not being apologetic, by demanding free, safe, legal abortion. So you can see kind of the difference in approach and strategy. Our experience with the Morning After Pill campaign, which Bhaskar mentioned when he was introducing me, was very similar. We were counseled to, oh, can't you just work on getting the morning after pill for rape victims in hospitals? And, those of us who had been raped had not gone to a hospital. Those of us who had used the pill, most of us had not been raped. That's not why we needed the morning after pill. So we just felt that when we actually looked at our own experience, it was not going to help us. So we went for what we really wanted, a slogan from Red Stockings, and we demanded it over the counter without exception for everybody. And it was a 10-year struggle. We were given a half victory, and we did not settle for it, which was that, oh, well, we'll make it over the counter if you're over 17, and then, oh, if you're over 16. We said no for all ages, and we continued to demand it, and we actually won. By not being apologetic, by being very straightforward that we needed the morning after pill, not because we were, we had been raped or victimized in some way, but because we were having sex and didn't want to have a kid. So I think both the Ireland case and our morning after pill case are good arguments why this is actually a winning strategy. And, to make demands that cover everyone, to really be forthright about it. Now, I want to go back a little bit and talk about why we're facing these attacks on abortion and birth control at this point in U.S. history. It's an important context to notice that the U.S. has had its lowest birth rate ever in the last few years. And this has caused concern among the establishment. In Europe, as the birth rate has dropped there, governments have come in with more support, like universal child care, family allowances. So that's a check you get every month because you have a kid. Long paid leaves for both parents. For example, in France and Sweden, employers are shelling out taxes to pay for parents to stay home with their kids for over a year. But in the US, the elite are determined not to pay for work that they can extract from us for free, right? So instead, we have faced an obstacle course of increasing difficulty and expense when we try to access abortion, birth control, and even basic sex education. So how do we get to this point? The young radicals who started the women's liberation movement 50 years ago did not expect that women would be free with capitalism intact. Many had already risked their lives and livelihoods in the movements of that day, the civil rights and the anti-war movements. Men were sexist in those movements, but that was not the only thing that made them decide to start an independent women's liberation movement. Men were sexist outside those movements too. Many women's liberation pioneers actually said that what started them on the path to an independent movement was the positive example of the Black Power movement. In some cases, they remember an explicit instruction to whites in the civil rights movement, which was turning to Black Power, to go fight your own oppressors. Most saw women's liberation organizing as recruiting a new constituency to the general freedom movement and creating an independent female power base to make sure rhetoric about equality and freedom for all did include women. And they were right that women's freedom cannot be won without confronting the power of employers and the rich. As it turned out, the movement did make important strides, but it was in areas that didn't cut too deeply into the prerogatives of capital and employers. In that category, we could call it column A. We've made progress on appearance and dress codes, integration of all male spaces and workplaces, men doing childcare, not enough, but there has been progress. Housework, better sex, divorce equality, educational equality. And then the areas where we're stuck or going backward, which we could call column B, are those that require capitalists to cede, control, or cough up resources. So equal pay, public childcare, paid family leave, conditions like universal health care and living wage jobs that allow women economic independence from men. Half of our progress towards equal pay has been the result of men's wages dropping to meet ours. So, and you can see, due to the fall in the birth rate starting in the 1970s, abortion and birth control have moved from column A, things that don't greatly impinge on the prerogatives of capital, to column B, things that do. And this means that feminist advance now requires a confrontation with the power of capitalists and employers over our reproductive work. So in other words, the power structure could accommodate our demands on abortion when birth rates were already quite high, which they were in the 60s. I mean, that was the peak, right, when the women's liberation movement started. But as birth rates have dropped, they've really started coming for our reproductive rights. And that's because they want our reproductive labor and they want it cheap. And for so long, they've been getting it cheap while we face crisis after crisis, right? Even in the best conditions, raising children can be complicated and stressful and full of heartache. At the same time, it's delightful and rewarding and full of love. Add money and time woes and partners who don't fully participate, and many are just deciding against having kids or stopping at just one, which explains our low birth rate and what we're calling an informal birth strike. So is it enough to just say, well, abortion is an economic issue? Nation writer Katha Pollitt writes that abortion allows women, quote, only to have children they want and can raise well, unquote. There's a problem with defending abortion this way, as both Red Stockings from the 60s and reproductive justice advocates have pointed out, and that is that it suggests that the solution to our economic struggles is to not have kids, right? This is just one more way we are expected to accommodate ourselves to an economy that stovepipes all the good things in life to the top 1% or 0.1% and leaves us with nothing, right? But this is the only solution that the Democratic wing of our establishment is willing to contemplate in response to the disaster that their policies have made of family life, right? Creating universal childcare and healthcare would require a redistribution of wealth from the rich to the rest of us. So they're trying to keep that off the table. And instead they propose tiny incremental benefits like vouchers and tax rebates and means-tested programs, including Obamacare, which I was on and was very grateful for, but it's means-tested, it's still very expensive. Means testing means that you have to prove your poverty to receive the benefit, and that means that people will be excluded when they can't prove that. And it divides the desperate who don't qualify against the even more desperate who do qualify. It's you know, but these are the dim horizons presented to us by our democratic establishment. Of course, the Republican program, we have to admit, is forced pregnancy. So there's that. I think that we have immediate opportunities in the United States to move our feminism toward a bolder, more universal demands. For example, for decades, feminists have been trying to defeat the Hyde Amendment, which are restrictions on federal abortion funding. And just defeating Hyde would expand abortion rights, but the growing demand for Medicare for all means that we have a chance to win health care for everyone, making sure full reproductive rights are included, as they are in the Medicare for all bill that Sanders introduced. That's a lot more inspiring than, once again, trying to get Congress to include abortion and Medicaid, a program that leaves many people out. And it's got other feminist benefits, which is that a universal healthcare system would mean that no one would be compelled to stay in a job or a marriage for healthcare. These are some of the ways that the struggle over abortion and birth control is related to our larger fights about who has control of things in this country. So I'll just leave it there and see if there are some questions.
Well, thank you for that, Jenny. That was really, really thorough. And I would like to also just remind people to check out Jenny's latest book in the Jacobin Verso series, Without Apology, because it is similarly concise and written in a way that only an editor could write, which is nice, sharp, and concise. That's my bias as an editor. I much prefer working with other editors than people who don't have that experience. Okay, so a bunch of questions are coming in. So while I filter through these questions, just as a reminder, everyone who's watching, please press the like button and subscribe. We're doing these talks almost every day at 6 p.m. Eastern, and we're really trying to build an audience and to put this material out there on YouTube, a venue that is not always hospitable to the political left. So while these questions are filtering in, I just want to ask you for an update. Obviously, you wrote a piece about 2 weeks ago on worrying recent attempts to use coronavirus as a cover for anti-abortion restrictions, particularly in Ohio and Texas. And that Jacobin piece was from the end of March. What's the latest on that front? Is there any good news to report?
Yeah, there's bad news and there's good news. So it's now I believe 7 or 8 states that have attempted to use the pretext of the pandemic to stop abortions. Their argument is that elective abortions will use personal protective equipment that could be used for other things, which is a pretty weak argument. And the big organization of gynecologists saw this coming in mid-March and specifically stated that elective abortion is essential medicine. So this is not, the doctors are actually on the right side on this one. You would think in a pandemic, it would be so great if there were only a way for people to get abortions without going to the doctor. And in fact, there is a way for people to get abortions without going to the doctor. The problem is that the FDA, starting in 2000, and a lot of states since then, have made it impossible to do that by restricting the use of abortion pills, which 40% of abortions in the United States now are done with pills. So we have several states that are attempting to stop it. Texas is the only one that has been able to get a court to agree. It's gone back and forth a couple of times, and leaving people who had appointments sitting there outside the clinic wondering why they can't get in, and then having to drive 13 hours to be handed a pill, right? So that's the kind of ridiculousness that we're seeing. And all the other states currently, you can still get an abortion, but they are it's only based on a court saying, yeah, this is a ridiculous regulation that you're putting through. So that's where we stand right now. And then there has been an appeal of the Texas decision to the US Supreme Court, which is sitting on it, has had it for 3 or 4 days and is sitting on it. So as long as they sit on it, Texas is still able to prevent people from getting abortions in Texas. The restrictions that we have on the abortion pill started in 2000 when the abortion pill mifepristone was finally approved in the United States for use in abortions. It has regulations called REMS, which are risk evaluation and mitigation strategy, used for the most dangerous drugs, often experimental cancer drugs, that kind of drug. The REMS for the abortion pill require that doctors get on a list. Clinics have to have be registered with the pill supplier. Pills cannot be gotten from a retail pharmacy. They have to be gotten in a clinic. They have to be handed to you by the doctor. None of this is necessary. It's been used in this country for 20 years. The safety profile is very good. And then in addition to the FDA's red tape, you also have 18 states that have specifically banned telemedicine abortion. So when clinics tried to extend abortion rights to people who lived in rural areas, they were basically prevented from doing that. So, and then you have these regulations that require you to go in and get an ultrasound, completely unnecessary for an abortion, but they require that, which of course also requires contact, travel, PPE, and then a 24-hour waiting period, which requires people to travel and go back and forth. All of these things, bad news for healthcare in a pandemic, right? There is some good news though, and it's sort of interesting how in a pandemic, the things that we've demanded for decades have suddenly become mainstream. The New York Times editorialized that telemedicine abortion pills should be made available immediately, and attorney generals in 20 states, including California, Illinois, and New York, and even North Carolina, wrote the FDA saying, get rid of the REMS requirements, at least for this period, although the letter basically made a good argument why there shouldn't be REMS requirements. Well, without the REMS, what that would mean is you could call up your physician, they could call in a prescription, you could either get the pills mailed to you or pick them up at the pharmacy, and that would be your abortion. So, and the right is a little freaked out that abortion will be able to escape the clinic setting due to COVID, and they have specifically are making statements about how we can't let this become a reason for telemedicine. The other thing that's happened related to COVID is that in Northern Ireland, abortion was decriminalized last fall, but it wasn't actually available within Northern Ireland. You had to go to other parts of the United Kingdom to get it. And that with the pandemic, people can't fly. So they're having to get on a ferry for 8 hours to go to Liverpool, which was ridiculous because once you get the pill, you take the pill, you could miscarry on the ferry. So they have actually, in the last couple of days, they've managed to demand that abortion pills be available in Northern Ireland without travel. So that's another victory that we've seen kind of basically due to the pandemic.
Right. And let's see, a bunch of questions have actually come in. So let me try to group two of them together. One question is, this question actually, I guess, came in right before you started talking about Planned Parenthood, which is, what should we think of Planned Parenthood? They're ideologically flawed, but do necessary work and are under attack. And I guess the question is about navigating both criticizing and defending Planned Parenthood. Then also, I guess, connected to that, there's a question from Susan Altieri, which is, why do you think the reform movement is so willing to continue to allow restrictions to abortion. So I guess those are somewhat related.
Yeah. So 60% of abortions in this country are not done by Planned Parenthood. They're done by independent clinics. So I think a lot of times the independents get left out of the discussion. People don't realize that. Planned Parenthood is in a tricky situation, but we can't, as a movement, let them decide the strategy of the movement based on their own institutional requirements and strategy for their own brand, right? That's the problem. Like we see in those ads, they're branding themselves, but the branding is sacrificing the struggle for abortion rights for everybody. That it just they're undermining our movement. So we have to criticize them. And I was looking through the ads that Planned Parenthood has done more recently, and they're a little bit better. I think the criticism and the abortion ban attempts in several southern states, even before the pandemic, several southern states and Midwestern states had tried to ban abortion, and some of these laws are trigger laws where if Roe is overturned, they will immediately ban abortion. So I think the failure of the strategy is starting to get to people in the movement, and they're starting to understand that militance is going to be necessary. We are not going to be able to do this by having a good relationship with some legislator or lobbying or being nice girls. It's just not going to work. So I think that's within Planned Parenthood. I know people who work for Planned Parenthood who are struggling with this right now. Within Planned Parenthood, there are a lot of debates, but we have to remember that, again, most abortions are not done in Planned Parenthood. They're done by independent clinics, which need your support. And so when you're giving donations, remember, Planned Parenthood is not the only source of abortion or abortion leadership in the movement. So I guess that would be how I would say to navigate it.
So the other question was about these, I guess, nominally center-left, nominally pro-abortion groups or pro-abortion groups that are so willing to allow restrictions on abortion. So I guess it's just a
Right.
question of
Well,
what the strategy behind. I guess this gets into what you were saying earlier about their institutional need for self-preservation in a hostile, environment. It just boils down to that.
yeah. I mean, they fight each one, right? So whenever there's a restriction put forward, and there are hundreds every year put forward and that get passed by legislatures, they fight it, but they fight it mostly in the legal arena. This is not exclusively where they fight it, but it's mostly they send the good lawyers, they try to win battles in court. And that has held back the tide to some degree. I mean, during this pandemic, it's holding back the tide, but it's not the strategy that the grassroots movement should rely on. It's just not enough. We need a upswelling of the grassroots movement that says no, abortion, free, safe, legal, like they said in Ireland. Let's expand abortion rights. Why are we talking about defending what we have when what we have means that 6 states have one clinic and they're completely embattled, and you have to drive several hours in many cases to get an abortion? It's just not enough. So there's not enough to say save Roe or save the abortion rights we have. We really need to expand the abortion rights we have, which are obviously completely under attack.
So speaking of Roe, there's another question that just a very quick ask for prognostication on what will happen with the Supreme Court composition and abortion rights, particularly, I guess, if Ginsburg, is no longer on the court. So I guess this gets in the question itself would seem to me to get into the wider problem of the excessive turn to just concern about the courts and what battles we can win there, as opposed to turning what's in every age demographic, at least from what I've seen, support for abortion rights into pressure on politicians and legislation and other things to preserve access. But I'll let you take that question.
Yeah. So right now, I think that we can safely say that there's a 5-4 majority against abortion on the Supreme Court right now. The question is, are they willing to overturn precedent? And I think the answer is really up to us. I mean, how much we fight, how much organizing we do around this. Um, One of the things that several states have done is they have put abortion rights into their laws, so that because in the 60s, when abortion was illegal in all states, there were some exceptions in some states, but basically what Roe did is it invalidated all those laws. Frequently those laws still exist, though, and so what the movement has been doing in New York and Illinois and Oregon and California is trying to get rid of the pre-existing laws against abortion, which could come back if Roe is overturned. Um, so those states and several others have actually made abortion explicitly and positively legal in their states, and have taken it out of the criminal code in some cases, which is the direction we need to be going. That creates pressure federally, and those movements. So, I don't want to predict what the court is going to do. I just think that we need to be fighting to advance the law, and in particular in the South, where I'm from, we have a big fight on our hands. But if you are organized, as we are in Florida, you don't see as many attacks coming down if you have an organized opposition to these attacks. So it really does matter how much organization there is, and how much heat and pressure we can bring to bear whenever something happens, including and up to, folks in New York are talking about doing mass actions like general strikes, blocking highways and so forth, really throwing down. Obviously not possible right now, but when the court comes back into session and we can get out on the streets, we need to be there.
Okay, so how about one last question that came in, which is also from Susan, which is about the current batch of Medicare for All proposals and demands. She's just wondering whether they have abortion explicitly mentioned, or whether it's being left out again.
Yes, the bills that the Sanders Medicare for All bill has abortion explicitly in it, and in New York, where we have a single payer bill, the New York Health Act, that also includes everything that Medicaid includes, and in New York, Medicaid includes abortion. So the question is, when you get to the negotiation stage and they start to try to get rid of things, and the two things that I think are going to be on the chopping block immediately are abortion and trans healthcare. Those are the two where they're going to try to divide people, and we have to be absolutely united that no, we need this to cover everybody for everything.
So since we did mention Sanders, I guess we had the very interesting experience these last couple of months of Sanders' record being somehow painted as waffling on the question of reproductive rights, or more generally, him being painted as some sort of anti-feminist politician. Do you see this as just rooted in how embedded NGOs are into the Democratic Party establishments, and just a bit of like insider, politics? A few groups attacking Sanders just to curry some favor with politicians they depend on, or is it something else?
Unfortunately, I do think that's what's going on. I mean, now, which has supported Sanders throughout his career as a politician in Vermont and as a senator, because Bernie has had 100% record on NOW's issues, National Organization for Women. Now, for some reason, decided to abandon Bernie in this particular period, and not only, well, endorsed Warren. Okay, they endorsed Warren. That's fine. When Warren dropped out, they urged Warren not to endorse Sanders, which is going rather above and beyond just saying, "Oh, we like Warren better." And now they're endorsing Biden, who has a really long record of misogyny. Even just leaving aside this the recent rape charge, his position during the Anita Hill hearings. He's been for the Hyde Amendment, which bans federal funding for abortion. He voted for the partial birth abortion ban. He's just been terrible on a lot of our issues, and now has attacked him. But now they are supporting him, and so I think we saw this during the in 2017 when Bernie supported Heath Mello for mayor of Omaha, where the people came out with the knives. The feminists suddenly were attacking him for, how could you support somebody who is personally against abortion but for abortion rights, which was Mello's position. How could you do that?
Same as Tim Kaine.
Right, exactly. So, but when Hillary Clinton named Tim Kaine as her running mate and told him, "Okay, we're going to be for getting rid of Hyde now," he came out explicitly in support of the Hyde Amendment just weeks after he was named VP. Right? He and yet somehow Planned Parenthood and NARAL were all, oh, what a wonderful choice. Tim Kaine is just such a wonderful choice. So, you can see the double standard there. And just leaving aside that, we need national health care for all the reasons that just everybody needs health care. It's also an important feminist demand because we need to be able to get healthcare without being dependent on spouses, husbands, jobs. Women go in and out of the workforce more. It's very important to our well-being and independence. That's why it's a feminist issue. Gives us power vis-a-vis men. That's what feminism means, right? So the fact that now and other feminist groups are willing to support candidates who don't support that and not support candidates who do just really shows that they've lost touch with what people out in the country need and what women have been striving for all of these years.
So I think that's a great place to wrap it up. And obviously, it's on the screen in front of you, but I'll do the reminder. You've been listening to Jenny Brown. She's the author, among other books, of Without Apology. And she's a Jacobin contributor and someone whose work really demands attention and who is incredibly prolific too. So you can find her work in many places. She wrote 2 books in 2019, actually, Without Apology and Bird Strike, the latter from PM, right?
Yeah.
And just as a reminder to everyone, tomorrow, Chris Maisano is covering the Marxism of Antonio Gramsci. Friday, David Kalnitsky. Saturday, we have a double header with Anna Kasparian, Michael Brooks at 1 p.m., and then Megan Day at 6 p.m. So we've been putting out a lot of these videos. Cale Brooks has been doing a great job producing this series. Me and other Jacobin contributors have been putting in the time to do it. So just our only ask at the moment is press, subscribe, and like. And for all the different authors and thinkers we have, we're including links to their books, their articles, and other things. Please do read them. And I know it's bleak times, but the struggle on the left is going to be a long struggle over many, many years and decades. So political education is a big part of it. Obviously, it can't be all of it. So my thanks to Jenny and to all the other activists and organizers and thinkers who've been appearing on this series. And we hope that everyone tunes in tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. All right. Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks.